Welcome to the Sweepstakes College Baseball Podcast. We are 5 weeks of college baseball into the season, and as everything sits, there is a lot of movement going on at the top. Teams just cannot consistently win against good opponents, which is what you like to see. A lot of competition out there, but especially in the SEC, we saw a very interesting weekend with every home team winning the series, even if it was against a top ranked team. We saw all the home teams winning, the road teams, dropping out, and that did not do so well for my series predictions. Well, we'll get into later, but I had three SEC road teams winning, so that was a easy knock to the record there. But we'll jump into that later. What were your thoughts on the past weekend of college baseball?
Yeah, just super messy, like you said. Teams scheduled these easy starts to the season, and now we jump into conference play. Teams are playing some legit opponents, and we're seeing who the pretenders and the contenders are. And there's certainly some teams that look more in mid-season to end of season form than others. And yeah, there was some really competitive baseball, but there was definitely a lot of surprises this weekend.
Yeah, and I think going along the SEC, the ACC is also seeing a lot of upheaval with the top teams, maybe not doing as well as people thought, and some teams right outside the top 25 really surprising. So, getting things started with our player of the week, we are going to someone in the ACC, and that's Carson DiMartini of Virginia Tech, going 9 for 15 on the week, which, by itself, pretty decent. But we'll add on 7 home runs there, and having 3 out of the 4 games he played in be multi-home run games is insanely impressive. And then add on 10 runs and 11 RBIs, totaling everything up there. It's a ridiculous weekend, and putting his numbers up there now is competing with the home run lead in college baseball.
Yeah, any one of those stats for the week is impressive on its own, let alone put them all together. And 7 home runs, that's a respectable number if you put that together for a season. Uh, but to put it together in one week is incredibly impressive.
Yeah, it was a spectacular weekend where Virginia Tech is now in consideration for being ranked after putting that all together. And now jumping to our top play of the week, we have someone out of Mississippi State. We'll play the clip now.
Shows bunt, drops one up the third base line, nicely laid down. Schulke's throw to first, got him at first. What a play by the pitcher, Cam Schulke.
So here we had Cam Schulke, the pitcher out of Mississippi State, with the sliding play to field the bunt and then throwing from the ground to get the runner out at first in a super close game against LSU. They did end up losing it, I believe, but was able to get a very, very solid out there to not let another runner on base and kind of hold things as is at the time. So really impressive play overall, especially for a pitcher because pitchers are athletes too. Love that. There were a lot of other spectacular plays, none that super stood out, but this one was definitely pretty special.
Yeah, this is the type of composure and smoothness on a play like this you expect from a middle infielder, uh, not a pitcher. But like you said, pitchers are athletes too, and they love to shine when given the opportunity to make a play like that.
100%. And now we have our patent pending sweep setback of the week. There were a lot of teams to choose from in the top 25 with, like we mentioned, a lot of upsets and a lot of teams that lost on the road or just didn't look like they fit the bill at where they were ranked. But we're gonna give this one to NC State after they went 0-4 this past week. Winless is never what you want to see out of a top 25 team, especially after they were on a 9-game win streak. To really stink it up here this week, and in a lot of rankings have them drop out. So one bad week sometimes is all that it takes, and NC State just could not put it together at all this week.
Yeah, losing the series to Georgia Tech isn't terrible. It's a pretty solid team that's on the outside looking in for a lot of top 25s across the board. Solid team, but to lose all 3 and just get absolutely smoked in the midweek by UNC Greensboro, I believe the score was 18-3. That's just not what you want to see. You want to at least be competitive, and I mean, most of the time, you really want to pick up those midweek wins against lesser opponents.
Yeah, for sure. It was could have been better with just one win there in the midweek, but couldn't get that done either, and just yeah, all over the place. Disappointment for a team that was trying to get their way into the top 10 there. But now going to our prediction results from last weekend, we had 5 ranked versus ranked matchups, and didn't end up going so well for me. A little bit better for you, but now we are tied overall at 12 and 13 each, which really doesn't bode well for our predictive skills here. Both under 500 now, but you definitely took advantage of the past week after I stunk it up with an 0 for 5 week, just going winless, just like NC State there, and yeah, with all the results going the wrong way, really tough one to swallow there.
Yeah, went with the home teams in a couple of those SEC matchups, and should have taken Florida as well. I said before that I had a gut feeling Florida put it together, but it was so hard to pick against Texas A&M without a loss going into the weekend. But yeah, overall solid week, but we both certainly have some work to do to get on the right side of things.
Yeah, I thought I was taking the easy way out on most of those predictions by taking the better ranked team, and it did not pay off whatsoever. So maybe have to rethink my algorithm there to pick some better teams. But after that, we'll jump straight into our rankings for week 5. After the past few weeks of college baseball, we saw Arkansas take that number 1 spot, and they are pretty much the only team in the top 10 that did very well and impressed on pretty much all cylinders. So they're staying in that number 1 spot and maybe solidifying themselves, even kind of separating themselves from the rest of the field a little bit. Maybe have some leeway to maybe lose a game or two this coming week if they really struggled a bit. Could potentially keep that number 1 spot going into next week as well.
Yeah, just have really dominated the start of this season, and the bats are getting going. We know this pitching staff is the best in the country right now. It's starting to look pretty similar to Wake Forest last year, where they're just really a step ahead of everyone else. And so, yeah, just a really complete team, especially with the offense getting going now, too.
Yeah, and that is the only team that we had staying in the same spot in our entire top 25. So a lot of mix-ups, and in that number 2 spot, we have Oregon State jumping up 3. One of their 2 losses now is to Utah, and the other one is from Arkansas. So really good overall resume. They won the series at Utah this past week. So, while a lot of teams struggled in the top 10, Oregon State just got the job done, won their series, and had a winning record on the week, which is a lot better than a lot of these other teams can say.
Yeah, this pitching staff has looked a little shaky the last 2 weeks. They've actually had a lot of close games and come from behind wins, but the position player group is just extremely talented and continues to put up runs and really carry this team. And yeah, I mean this position group can certainly carry them a long way, it looks like.
Yep, for sure. And then at 3, we have Clemson jumping up 5, similar to what we did last week with Duke when they won an impressive series on the road. Clemson does the same thing to Duke, so now Duke's dropping back, and Clemson's kind of taking that similar spot after they went 4-1 the past week and won that series at Duke. So just really impressive overall for this Clemson team. Now also at 17-2, just all the top 3 teams having the same record kind of bodes well for them, kind of separating a bit. But yeah, look super impressive and have put together a really good resume so far.
Yeah, I think the South Carolina series had a lot to do with me picking Clemson to take that series on the road, and I feel like they really proved themselves right in that sense, and kind of reaffirmed that guess there. And I think Clemson just looks really comfortable in those close games and competitive environment. They don't look phased whatsoever. They've played a lot of tight games at the end against good teams now, and they've come away with a lot of wins.
Yeah, there are some games where they're seemingly on like the last pitch of the game and were able to turn things around and tie a game or something like that and eventually win it. So they definitely have that ability, and seems like kind of what you need to have a really good run in the postseason. Obviously, this is still very early on, but right now they're playing at that level where they could play. If they can keep things going, this is what you want to see from a team that could make a deep run. And in that number 4 spot, right after them, is LSU, dropping back one, even after losing their weekend series to Mississippi State, who was not ranked last week. So not a great weekend loss, but as we mentioned, all SEC road games did not go too well for pretty much anybody, and LSU was able to pick up 2 midweek wins, which kind of just bumps up the record a little bit. Still have a winning record on the week, which is better than a lot of other teams. And even though it was against North Dakota State, win's a win, and it looks the best on paper for a lot of these other teams. So LSU giving up a lot of runs, especially on the weekend. So definitely some question marks there. Want to hone that in, but yeah, at this point, staying in that number 4 spot.
Yeah, tough to win SEC series on the road, and Mississippi State now is looking an awful lot better than they did last season. Really looks like they're putting it together right now. Another big series next weekend ahead for them, but LSU, like you said, the main concern there was with the pitching staff this weekend. Just gave up a lot of runs and really just pitched themselves out of games. So definitely need to tighten things up on that end, and big series this weekend coming up to try and right things.
Yep, and then at 5, another SEC team that is probably hotter than LSU at the moment. We have Vanderbilt. After predicting this team to be maybe the team that disappointed the most in the SEC, they have gone on an insanely hot streak recently. And yeah, they've just looked super impressive. Maybe the best or second best team right now, at least playing wise, in the SEC. Yeah, and we had them pretty far down in the rankings at 13 the past week, and being able to jump up this high is not only, because of teams above them doing poorly, but they've just been playing so hot, so they deserve to jump up a decent amount anyways.
Yeah, I think Vandy, along with Clemson, are probably the 2 teams for me that have the most momentum in the country right now. Just really climbing these rankings and continuing to take down top competition and playing really well against solid teams, and really proving that they're on the right track.
Yeah, and we will keep the SEC streak alive. At number 6, we have Texas A&M, jumping up 1 spot, even though they lost their weekend. They did pick up their first 2 losses, so now at 18-2. Yeah, not great overall, but they were at a top 10 team, so at 10 Florida. So really not a terrible week. You kind of maybe would expect them to go like 2-2 like they did. If it was just like a standard week and they're playing a top 10 team on the road, you can't really expect them to win that necessarily. So kind of did what you might expect. So deserved to, in another week, probably is dropping down a few spots, but because everybody around them also didn't do well and maybe hasn't done well for a few weeks now, they happen to jump up a spot.
Yeah, the undefeated run really boosted their resume there, and they took advantage of a lot of other teams playing poorly, like you said. 2-2 probably was the expectation going into the weekend, and I think that series overall at Florida just looked really evenly matched. Both just exchanging blows the whole weekend, and yeah, looked like 2 very solid teams, 2 of the best teams in the SEC, and 2 of the best teams in the country.
Yeah, and again, another SEC team at 7 is now Tennessee, dropping back 1 spot. So just a little flip flop between Texas A&M and Tennessee there. I think they had pretty similar weeks, just all around. Maybe Texas A&M just overall looks a little bit more comfortable and has just looks a little bit better at the time. But Tennessee went 2-2 as well. Lost to Alabama on the road, so not a terrible week in comparison to some of these other teams. Why we didn't drop them back super far, and for the most part, it was a pretty competitive series as well. So what you want to see just ended up on the wrong side of that Sunday game, which was a very close game.
Yeah, another really competitive weekend there at Bama. Yeah, like you said, just a slightly worse series loss on the road than A&M at Florida, and I think A&M just has a slightly better resume at this point, but very close and very competitive there. No overwhelming concerns, just a tough series to win on the road there.
Yeah, and finally breaking up the SEC streak, we have Duke at number 8 after going 2-3 the past week. Not great overall after losing a game to Ryder in the midweek and then losing versus Clemson on the weekend. So really a hangover after doing so well against Wake Forest there, and very similar position as what happened the previous week to Wake Forest, where losing a series at home that you probably should take if you are a top 2 team in the nation like we had Duke. And yeah, Clemson was able to take the wins there, which is better than a lot of these other teams can say, where a top team was losing on the road. But yeah, Duke still impressive overall. The pitching was not the best, so I expect them to be able to turn that around, since we've seen that again and again out of this Duke staff, just so deep. So we'll see what happens there. They have a really tough stretch of games for it seems like the next 2 months, but yeah, they have enough ranked teams to play that they should be able to rebound if they can turn things around.
Yeah, unlike previous weeks, I think this is the first time we've seen Duke let games slip away late. This bullpen's been pretty lights out all of last year and to start this year as well, but just let some games slip late this weekend, and they really could have saved face if they won both of those midweeks. Would have been a 3-2 week, which doesn't look bad at all, even losing the weekend. If that was the case, maybe they even stay top 5, but to drop a game to especially a team like Ryder that I think only has a couple wins on the season. That's a tough look there.
Yeah, and now at 9, jumping back to the SEC, we have Florida once again going 2-2 and winning their weekend. It seems like that happens every week now, and overall they're 12-7, so just does not look good on paper. But they just keep winning their weekend series, have yet to lose one, and they're facing tough competition on the weekend. But did happen to lose their midweek to Florida State, which obviously is not a terrible loss, but still at home there. Yeah, so just keep racking up those losses, and at some point they're gonna have to drop down the rankings. But this week they jump up a spot, just because other teams around have had a few bad weeks or worse weeks in consecutive weeks. So Florida kind of gets lucky there by just taking advantage of winning a weekend series once again.
Yeah, not the overall record you expect out of a top 10 team at this point in the season, but it's hard to hate on a team too much that's winning all of their weekends, and especially when they're playing tough competition like this week. Yeah, you definitely would like to see them pick up that midweek game, especially at home. But overall, just they won their weekend, so it's hard to drop them really.
Yeah, and rounding out our top 10, we have East Carolina jumping back into that spot, up 2 spots from the previous week after going 4-0 against lesser competition. We've seen this a few times, kind of what you expect with mid-major schools not always facing the best competition, just getting the job done. So, yeah, in a week like this, they are moving up a few spots.
Yeah, I think the good thing with the East Carolina is they do play quite a bit of tough midweek games, and they already have that series win over North Carolina, so they've kind of solidified themselves as being able to hang with top competition and win those games. So even a 4-0 week against lesser competition, you don't just completely dismiss it.
Yep. And now at 11, we have Virginia jumping up 5 spots after going 3-1 and winning the weekend series versus what was number 4 Wake Forest. So super impressive week, just piling on Wake Forest, who are really struggling at the moment after being number 1 team in the nation. They see themselves outside of the top 10 in 2 weeks, so really dropping back quickly. And yeah, for Virginia, just super impressive week and really put some damage on that what should be good Wake pitching staff.
Yeah, super impressive series win, even at home. We're down to their last out in that Sunday game, but we're somehow able to tie it up and then end up pulling it off in extras. So incredible grit out of them to pull off that series win, especially after dropping the series just a week ago. So yeah, good to see them get things back on track there.
Yep, and now at 12 we have Alabama going up 2 spots from last week after going 2-2, similar to a Florida situation where they lose their midweek and then win the weekend series, which is an impressive weekend series versus what was number 6 Tennessee. So impressive on the weekend, but they did lose to Southern Miss during the midweek. So not a terrible loss to pick up there, especially since Southern Miss was right on the outside of the top 25 last week. Might make their way in this week. We'll see what happens at the end of the top 25. But yeah, Alabama could have been better. Obviously, going 3-1 maybe would have been able to jump them into potentially the top 10. But still took care of business on the weekend, so jumps up a few spots here.
Yeah, solid week, like you said. Not a bad midweek game to drop. Certainly would like to see him pick it up, but still a good week overall. And that was a very competitive series against Tennessee, and impressive for them to pull that off.
Yeah, and now at 13, we have the former number one team in the nation, the only other team besides Arkansas that has held that spot. Wake Forest now at 13-6 after going 1-3 the past week, going on the road midweek to Coastal Carolina and then to Virginia and only picking up one win. Super unfortunate. Probably would have liked to see a 2-2 week. That would have been kind of what you'd expect after going against all ranked teams. But right now, the pitching staff is really struggling, and that was supposed to be probably their strongest point in the whole team. Obviously, they should have a good offense too, as the preseason number one team in the nation. But pitching was supposed to be dominant, and it's really struggling outside of Chase Burns right now.
Yeah, I feel like this team is in a pretty similar boat to Florida, except Florida is actually winning their weekend series. But both teams picked to be a couple of the top teams in the country, but just really not living up to expectations so far, and really just not playing up to that standard. And Wake is dropping those weekend series and drop the midweek here to Coastal as well, who's a very good team, but still just not what you want to see out of a team that was trying to vie for be the best team in the country. And like you said, outside of Chase Burns right now, we have no idea what good there is on that pitching staff right now.
Yeah, the pitching lab is a struggle right now. It's in shambles. But at 14, we have a new team to break into the top 25, this high up, and it's Florida State, the only undefeated team left in college baseball, at least in Division One. Now at 18-0 after going 4-0 the past week, winning a midweek at Florida, and then sweeping the weekend versus Notre Dame. There are a few close games there, but got the job done, staying undefeated, super impressive. And we said last week that even if they had an iffy week, they were going to jump in, and going 4-0 is definitely not iffy. So they skyrocket into the top 25, and 14 at this point is pretty deserved.
Yeah, you're typically not going to see a team jump this high into the rankings, but hard to deny them being undefeated up to this point. You know, we've said before, a lot of teams just rack up those easy wins the first 4 weeks or so. And Florida State did that, but this week they proved it against pretty solid competition. And yeah, it's really hard to deny a team that's just won every single game so far this year.
Yep, and now at 15, we have Coastal Carolina jumping up 4 spots after going 3-1 midweek versus Wake Forest, which they won, and then weekend series against James Madison. So good week taking down Wake and winning weekend. Can't really complain. Maybe a sweep would have been better, but 3-1 still very impressive after defeating Wake in the midweek game.
Yeah, solid week overall. Like you said, would be nice to have the sweep, but I mean, when you're a mid-major team, I feel like the main focus outside of winning your weekend is winning those midweeks when you play solid competition, and they took care of that end there by beating Wake in the midweek.
Yeah, for sure. And now at 16, we have one of our biggest droppers, and that's TCU. Now, 15-5 overall, 1-3 the past week. They won their midweek against DBU, so good win there, but then got swept at home versus Oklahoma. Really, really rough start to conference play, only getting one win so far in 2 weeks. So, got saved a little bit by winning that midweek game, but need to get the job done one way or another. They're going to be dropping out of the top 25 really quick.
Yeah, not often you're going to see a team at the bottom of their conference standings still in the rankings, but here you have TCU. We praised them early on for winning all those close, ugly games, but they continued to pull it off, and wins are wins. But at this point, they just look bad right now. The last 2 weeks just haven't been great. Oklahoma and Kansas are solid teams, but it's not two teams that you should be going 1-5 against in conference play, and they really need to get things back on the right track now.
Yeah, getting swept at home is never a good look either when you're supposed to be a top 10 team. And at 17, we have the team that lost to them the past week, Dallas Baptist, after going 3-1. That was their only loss after sweeping Texas A&M Corpus Christi. So good job getting the sweep on the weekend, but unfortunate to miss the opportunity there against a struggling TCU squad.
Yeah, definitely would have liked to see them pick up that win against TCU, especially with how TCU's struggling right now. But they have proved it in some other games against top competition. Have a win against Alabama and a couple other solid wins as well. So still a solid team, and solid week overall.
Yeah, and now at 18, we have North Carolina dropping back 3 spots after going 3-2 the past week, losing the weekend series at Miami, who seems to just play super well at home recently, but did pick up 2 wins in the midweek versus Rutgers, so boosting that record a little bit more. So definitely helps, but unfortunate to lose the weekend at what seems like pretty solid Miami squad now after the past few weeks.
Yeah, hard to be mad at 3-2 overall. Would like that series win, but like you said, Miami looks solid. Played Florida really tough last weekend, so not a rollover team whatsoever. And yeah, not the worst week for North Carolina, especially with it being 3-2 at the end of the day.
Yep, and at 19 we have South Carolina dropping back 2 spots after going 2-2 and losing the series at Ole Miss. Was able to salvage it, winning the final game, but definitely not a great week losing on the road. But can redeem themselves and stay in the rankings by going up against Vanderbilt this coming week.
Yeah, this upcoming weekend will tell a lot as far as where their competitive level is, and yeah, not a bad series to lose to Ole Miss. It looks like both the Mississippi SEC teams, Ole Miss and Mississippi State, are getting back on the right track after absolutely falling off a cliff after both of their title runs. Looks like they're headed back in the right direction. So not the worst series, but definitely would like to see a little better.
Yep, and then at 20, we're staying in the Carolinas with NC State, the setback team of the week after going 0-4 the past week. So talked about them already, but got swept on the road versus Georgia Tech and just looked really bad overall. And they did get a sweep last week, so that's kind of what keeping them in the rankings at this point. But can't put another bad week together to stay in a spot like this.
Yeah, just a really tough week, especially getting smoked in that midweek, like we mentioned earlier. It's just not a good look, and they have a really tough week ahead as well. 4 games against ranked opponents, so hopefully they can manage a 2-2 week. If they somehow pull off the 3-1 week, then they certainly earn their spot to stay in the top 25. Potentially could with a 2-2 week, but gonna be hard to pull that off.
Yep, and at 21, we have Campbell jumping up 3 spots after going 4-0 against mediocre competition, similar to what we said about East Carolina. They got the job done in a week where a lot of teams didn't, and for a mid-major, that's kind of just what you need to do when you're playing bad teams.
Yeah, took care of business, like you said. Not a whole lot proven this weekend, but good to just take care of it and get a 4-0 week.
Yep. And now at 22, we have another team jumping into the rankings, and that is Oklahoma. First time being ranked this year after going 4-1 the past week, losing a midweek to Oklahoma State, but then winning versus UTA, and then, of course, sweeping TCU on the road. Super impressive, and now they're 6-0 in conference, so have to put him in after a start like that in conference play. Super impressive. Their record overall isn't amazing, but they have faced pretty tough competition for the most part.
Yeah, this was a team on the fringe of our top 25 the first week or two, and yeah, 6-0 to start conference play. Very impressive, and like you said, the overall record isn't necessarily there, but they've played one of the toughest schedules in the country so far, and so to be able to consistently pull off wins, it's starting to look really good now.
Yep, and at 23, another team jumping in the rankings, but this team, not the first time they've been ranked this year. We have UC Santa Barbara after going 3-0, the sweep versus Long Beach State, who seems like a pretty decent team overall. So impressive week to jump back in the rankings. They were kind of right outside it for a while and finally got to a point where their record was in a decent spot to be able to make that jump back in.
Yeah, the main struggle for Santa Barbara was that overall record. Just dropped a few too many games in those early weeks, and it's hard to stay ranked when you're barely above 500, even if you have some good wins. So, yeah, a 3-0 week's what you want to continue racking up that win column, especially for a mid major.
Yep. And at 24, we have UC Irvine after going 2-2 the past week, losing to UConn in the midweek, and then winning the series versus UC Davis. Really should have swept them, but could not close out that final game. And yeah, picked up another loss there and made them drop back a few spots in our top 25.
Yeah, certainly should have won that Sunday game. I checked the score, wrote 3-1 on the week in my notes. Yeah, I guess that just shows game's never over in baseball until it's really over. You gotta get those final outs, and yeah, super unfortunate to not be able to pull off that sweep.
Yeah, UC Davis put up 8 runs in the top of the ninth to tie the game, and then won it in extras there. So just yeah, really meltdown for that UC Irvine pitching staff in the final inning there. But now finishing out our top 25 this week is Southern Miss jumping into that final spot after going 4-0, beating what was number 14 Alabama in the midweek, and then sweeping Marshall. So really most impressive just getting the midweek win there. The weekend sweep got the job done, so getting those wins super impressive. But really looking back the past few weeks, beating Indiana State and Louisiana Tech in the past 2 weekends is a great way to boost that resume, even though their record is 14-6, so not the best maybe for teams right outside the top 25, but just the competition that they played recently proved that they deserve to jump into to the rankings.
Yeah, not a overwhelmingly impressive record, but a lot of teams on the fringe of the top 25 are in a similar boat. And like you said, outside of this week, Southern Miss has played some tough competition and then picked up this midweek win against Bama. So solid overall.
Yep, and now I'll quickly go through the teams that dropped out the past week, which included Texas, who was at 20, Texas Tech at 21, Auburn at 23, and Georgia at 25. So real swap up in the Big 12 and SEC so far, and there are a lot of SEC teams right outside the top 25 ready to pounce back in. Obviously the teams that I just mentioned, but Ole Miss and Mississippi State right on the fringe there, as well as Kentucky. Those teams were, kind of boosting their records early in the year before conference play started, and they all had a good start to the conference. So right on the fringe there. Just want to see one more competitive series out of them probably before they jump back into the top 25 for the first time in a very long time, at least for Ole Miss and Mississippi State. But yeah.
Yeah, a lot of teams knocking on the door, like you said. Even the four that dropped out only takes one or two good weekends to be right back in the thick of things. And I think the only other school I had in mind outside of the ones you mentioned is Georgia Tech, sweeping NC State this weekend. They have 2 losses to Georgia, so quality losses. Would have liked to see them pick up one of the games in that weekend. Unfortunately, they only played 2 instead of the full 3. But yeah, that's definitely a team to keep an eye on as well.
Yeah, I'll also mention some other tech schools. Obviously, we have Georgia Tech and then Virginia Tech and Louisiana Tech, all right outside the top 25, I believe, for us. Yeah, all have had pretty good starts to the year. And then I guess a few others to mention would be Indiana State and Oregon. All those teams have looked pretty good, pretty solid overall and have slowly started to rack up the wins and put themselves in a position to be right outside the top 25 going into next week. But that is our top 25 rundown, and that's, I guess, it for the podcast this week. Remember to keep your eyes out for later in the week for our weekend series predictions, which will be very interesting this week. Got to come up with a new strategy after going 0 for 5 the past week and losing my entire lead there. But stay tuned for that, and be sure to pay attention for our best bets, which will be on Twitter. Check those out. Just a little fun thing on the side there. And be sure to stick around for more juicy college baseball content. Goodbye.